Hello, and welcome to your favorite bookish podcast, Fully Booked and Caffeinated. I'm Heather.
I'm Kelsey.
Today's episode is about the Vietnam War-based historical fiction novel, The Women by Kristin Hannah. So before we get into some really depressing topics, what are you drinking or what coffee did you have this morning?
This morning I'm back on my protein coffee kick because I'm back to being consistent about working out in the mornings. Give me a break. Anyway, so I just had some regular, I think it's the donut shop flavor coffee from Walmart. But it's just like regular in the coffee maker.
Yeah.
And then I had a coffee flavored protein shake with it. And it was delicious and it lasts me all day, which is a good thing and a bad thing. What caffeinated beverage are you having?
Tonight I'm having a nice, crisp, wild cherry Pepsi. You know, I've been on that cherry Pepsi kick lately. I don't know what's going on. I mean, I do. I love it so much. That's what's going on.
Yeah,
but
it hits for sure.
It's good. I was going to stop for a coffee on the way home from work, but it was just a day. So I'm like, no, I don't feel like stopping. I deserve a coffee. Of course, I deserve a little treat, but I'm just going to go home.
Sometimes even a little treat is too much.
It's too much. I was like, no, I'm good. So
I get that.
Yeah. Anyways, cheers.
Great. Yeah, we're doing great. Cheers.
So Kristin Hannah, this is your first Kristin Hannah book.
Sure is. Mm-hmm. And wowie.
Yes. I've talked about her a couple times on the Bookish Banter episodes because I've read a few of her books now, and she's definitely an auto-buy for me. So I'm glad that we finally chose one of her books to read because she's a very good author. So good that she's award-winning and a best-selling author of more than 20 novels, including the international blockbuster The Nightingale, which I have not read yet, but I have. You actually got it for me at like a thrift store, which was named Goodreads' Best Historical Fiction Novel for 2015, and it also won the coveted People's Choice Award for Best Fiction in the same year. So not even just like Best Historical Fiction, it was just like Best Fiction.
Okay.
So that's I need to like
add that
read
to my
this
list.
now. I know, like now I really need to read this one. Additionally, it was a selection of the Reese Witherspoon Book Club. It was named Best Book of the Year by Amazon, iTunes, BuzzFeed, The Wall Street Journal, Paste, and The Week. So this was definitely, I think, The Nightingale was probably her best book. And it's probably what skyrocketed her into like her success now. In 2018, The Great Alone, which I read and loved, became an instant New York Times #1 bestseller and was named the best historical novel of the year by Goodreads.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people talk about The Great Alone.
Yeah, that was one that takes place in Alaska, like rural Alaska. And then in 2021, The Four Winds was published, and it, same thing, immediately hit #1 on the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and it was an indie bookstores bestseller lists. So like indie bookstores like really did well with this one.
Okay. Nice.
And it was selected as a book club pick by both the Today Show and the Book of the Month Club, which we're members of. And it was named the best book of 21. So she's just killing it. She's just
wow.
So many best books.
Leave some room for the rest of everybody.
I know. So The Nightingale is currently in production at TriStar, and it has Dakota and Elle Fanning set to star. Because the book is actually about two sisters.
Okay, I love that.
So I think that's really cool that they're going to be like playing actual sisters in the show or movie, whatever they're going to do. And apparently TriStar has also optioned The Great Alone, and it's in development. So I'm interested to see how they'll do that. Just because of how nature-esque it is and how much they talk about all that. That'll be interesting. And then Firefly Lane, which was on Netflix, that has Katherine Heigl and Sarah Chalke. That was one of her books as well, and that was a #1 Netflix series for a bit when that came out. So, she's a former attorney. Didn't know that. I was like, I feel like a lot of the times these authors are attorneys.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
What a weird pipeline.
Yeah, I know.
Because you'd think you'd be sick of being on a computer and researching and writing and...
Apparently Apparently not. Apparently these attorneys just love to read and write, which I guess tracks.
Yeah.
Research.
And
I guess you do a
research.
lot of
Yeah.
research, like as an attorney, so I guess it's nothing new. At least with maybe researching a book, it's more fun
Hmm.
because you're choosing what to research.
That's true.
If there's anybody that's an attorney on here that agrees with that, let me know. Maybe I'm on the right track. All right, so the Goodreads description of the women. An intimate portrait of coming of age in a dangerous time and an epic tale of a nation divided. Women can be heroes. When 20-year-old nursing student Frankie McGrath hears these words, it is a revelation. Raised in the sun-drenched idyllic world of Southern California and sheltered by her conservative parents, she has always prided herself on doing the right thing. But in 1965, the world is changing, and she suddenly dares to imagine a different future for herself. When her brother ships out to serve in Vietnam, she joins the Army Nurse Corps and follows his path. As green and inexperienced as the men sent to Vietnam to fight, Frankie is overwhelmed by the chaos and destruction of war. Each day is a gamble of life and death, hope and betrayal. Friendships run deep and can be shattered in an instant. In war, she meets and becomes one of the lucky, the brave, the broken, and the lost. But war is just the beginning for Frankie and her veteran friends. The real battle lies in coming home to a changed and divided America, to angry protesters, and to a country that wants to forget Vietnam. The Women is the story of one woman gone to war, but it shines a light on all women who put themselves in harm's way and whose sacrifice and commitment to their country has too often been forgotten. A novel about deep friendships and bold patriotism, The Women is a richly drawn story with a memorable heroine whose idealism and courage under fire will come to define an era.
Wow.
Strong summary. Strong description.
Seriously. And
Yeah.
it doesn't give anything
It gives
away.
nothing away. Nothing. You have no
Nothing.
idea. Walking into this book, you're like, oh, this will be. But you know what? I will admit, her book descriptions do that. They give nothing away. They just kind of give you an inkling of what it could be about. And then Kristin Hannah just takes you on a freaking ride.
Yeah, it's like the underlying message.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that was. And then
Yep.
the story is what you read.
Exactly. So this book is broken up into two parts. And in part one, it is May 1966. And Frankie is 20. She's a young woman from a wealthy family with a decorated military history, whose brother Finley is about to ship out to serve in the Navy in the Vietnam War, along with his best friend, Rye Walsh. One of the interesting things about this family is the dad just has what he calls a hero's wall, and it's a wall of all their family that's been in some kind of war, but the dad was unable to actually ever serve because he had some kind of health issue. I don't remember what it was. I think he has the wall too because he couldn't do it. And I think this is like his way of showing, if I could have, I would have. But in my mind, especially reading this book, I wonder if the dad would have ever really gone to war.
Yeah. And
Like,
the way
you
even
know,
that Frankie describes it is that like
yeah,
he talks about it so much and he has such strong opinions and memories and all this stuff that people almost forget that he never served. And that's
yeah.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
what he's doing on purpose.
In the beginning of the book, you're just immediately thrown into this house and they're at this party, and Rye comes up to Frankie, who's just staring at this wall, and he's like, you know, women can be heroes too. And just this simple 4 or 5 word phrase changes her entire trajectory in life completely. And she decides that she wants to enlist in the war as a nurse, mainly because she wants to go be with her brother. And I think her whole thought process is like, oh, I'll go over to Vietnam with Finley and like we'll be together. And she tries to go to all these different
branches.
No, thank you. My brain is not working. All the different branches. She gets turned away by the Navy. She gets turned away by the Air Force. She gets turned away by whatever else. And then finally Army's like, yeah, sure, whatever. We'll throw you in.
Yeah, she gets turned away from these other branches because they need more experience
Yeah.
in order to send someone to war. And the army's just like, no, we need you, so we'll send you with no experience.
Yeah.
Which, like, in hindsight, yikes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, apparently America and the Vietnam War. I learned a lot from this book. I'm gonna be real. I learned a lot.
Me too.
But before she actually is sent to Vietnam, Finley is killed in action. So this whole plan that she had to enlist was purposely to go overseas to be with her brother, and now that's just not going to happen. But she still has to, she signed up, so she has to follow through. So she still attends basic training, and she ships out in about a year. She ships out in March 1967. And as soon as she gets there, she befriends two fellow nurses, Barb and Ethel, who you just immediately love. They're these badass, hard women that take no shit. And they more or less take Frankie under their wing and train her and try to toughen her up. Because imagine being thrown into this situation with barely any nurse experience. You're a newbie and you just have to fix someone's leg that just got blown off. You're just immediately thrown into this destruction and terror, and there's nothing that you can't just be like, I'm out, I'll see you later. You have to just deal with it. So she eventually becomes a surgical nurse, and she works with surgeon Dr. Jamie Callahan. One thing I will say about this book is Frankie has she can turn a man's head, because Jamie Callahan is married with children, but he just immediately falls in love with Frankie is the vibe that I get. He's just so enamored by her. And Frankie's like, I'm a good girl. Like, I'm not going to sleep with you. I'm not going to do anything. That's not who I am. But they do become very, very close. And just before his tour of duty is complete, his helicopter is shot down and he is killed. So Jamie is our first tragic loss for Frankie. And she's
second after Finley.
You're right.
This one she actually sees.
Yeah, this is like the first that she's in the trenches and she sees what happens and how it's an instant. It's instantaneous. You just can lose somebody just like that. And then eventually she's reassigned to a more dangerous location, which the way that this location was described, I was scared. I'm not even there, and I'm scared. They're just like talking about, they're like hiding in the woods. And I'm just, nope, not for me. And
there's just constantly bombs going off so close that the buildings are shaking, gunshots all the time, and they just keep on keeping on.
They keep on keeping on.
They're right in the middle of everything.
But during this and what's going on, she becomes this increasingly capable nurse. She excels. She's helping these surgeons. There was one point where she's in this new dangerous location and a new doctor comes on, and the doctor gets thrown into his first day, and they called it boats of people, or like helicopters of people. They just airdrops. There was just a bunch of men that were hurting, and the doctor basically like blanks, and Frankie's like, bruh, get your shit together. We gotta save some lives. One of the things I loved about Frankie too in these situations is that she was so, even though it was such a tough situation and heartbreaking, she was so good with these soldiers. She was always there to offer a hand, especially if they were dying. Like she was that nurse that was, it's like Nurse Ratched, but like nice Nurse Ratched. Like she's like, I will be with you. Like, you're going to die, but I'm not going to let it be like in vain or like by yourself. And then they're always like, my mom. And she'll actually write to these soldiers' family and like let them know. And, but then she'll take pictures with men that she saved. And it's just this whole.
And she would make sure to look at their dog tags and call them by their name. And even sometimes like when, they knew someone was a lost cause, they're like, okay, on to the next. She would take that extra minute to stand there and hold their hand and make sure that they didn't die completely alone.
Yeah.
And then she's like, okay. And then she'd be right back in it on to the next. It was this feeling of compassion that even though she was so used to the fast pace and she was one of the best nurses there, she still took that extra time to
Mm-hmm.
be a human being. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you have to remember she was only 21. Like she's so
Hmm.
young. She's so young, and this
And
is
she was so
brand
sheltered
new.
too.
Yeah, she was coming from a wealthy family where her
An all
dad and
girls
mom are part
school.
of like a country club and everything. She doesn't understand the meaning of poverty and everything. So it's the fact that she
And
can look past herself.
exactly. And there's also this glamorization that people had of the war because of how people talked so highly of people who served in World War II and, the wars before. And even Finley, because he went to the Naval Academy, everything was just glamorized. He
Yeah.
was like, oh, I'm just going over to Vietnam to chill. I'm just going to serve my country and hang out in my plane. And obviously it didn't end up that way. And so she
Mm-mm.
gets there and she's like, wow, this is not what I was expecting at all. And just the amount of people that she sees hurt and the amount of casualties, she never could have comprehended that.
No, absolutely not. So in comes Rye Walsh. I mentioned him 5 seconds ago. He was Finley's best friend. So one of the things that I liked in this book that seemed fun is that when there was, I'm saying this in quotation, like downtime, they would have like parties,
Mm-hmm.
like full on parties. And she ends up bumping into Rye Walsh at one of these parties. And
Mm-hmm.
they're both like, what the, and Frankie tells him, you telling me that women can be heroes. I did it. Like, I'm here and this is what I want to do. And again, it's very similar to Jamie. Like, she kind of instantly becomes attached to him. But then again, she finds out that he's engaged. And
Mm-hmm.
so again, she's just like, come on, like, why can't this girl can't catch a break? She keeps going for
Well, and
these
it's even
unattainable
harder
men.
because she had a crush on him
Yeah.
because it was always her big brother's best friend.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing him reminds her so much of her brother and of that loss that it's like this one hits even harder.
And I think what's good for her too with Rye is that it is a piece of home for her. So she's able to she just creates this. It was very similar to her whole situation with Jamie, because Jamie was this man that seriously he wanted Frankie like bad, like real bad, but he was so respectful and wouldn't cross any boundaries. He understood like what she wanted, and
Mm-hmm.
Frankie wanted to tell him that she loved him before he died, and she never got that chance. So I feel now with Rye, she's a little more open to the idea, is the vibe that I get as her
Mm-hmm.
relationship with Rye progresses. I don't necessarily think that
And
she
it's
thought it
also
was
like
going to go
fate.
anywhere. Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
what are the chances that they both ended up in the same place at the same
Mm-hmm.
time on the other side of the world?
Exactly. Another thing that I had no idea that they did, but during the war, they more or less send you on like a holiday, but like not a holiday. Like she went to Hawaii.
Yeah, I did not know this was a thing, and they call it like R&R, and
Uh-huh.
you're allowed to meet up with your family there. Like if your family flies there to meet you.
Yeah. And this was insane to me. So she's in
Yeah.
Hawaii and it's funnily enough because at this point Ethel was gone first. Ethel's tour was done. And so she went back home to, where was she? I know Barb was Georgia and Virginia, right?
Virginia.
Mm-hmm. So
Yep.
Ethel
Hmm.
was going home to Virginia. Eventually, Barb's tour is done and she decides not to re-enlist. So she goes back home to Georgia. And so Frankie's approached by whoever runs the R&R, and her immediate thought is, "Oh, Barb did this, right? Like Barb knew," because also Frankie decided that she wants to re-enlist, which did not see that coming.
I know. But then the way she was talking about it,
Mm-hmm.
she was like, I could save so many more people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think inherently, I think she was also scared to go home. She had no idea how bad it was going to be, but I think she was
Yeah.
scared.
So she decides to re-enlist. So she's in Hawaii and she's on the beach, and lo and behold, who shows up? Mr. Rye Walsh, who is now conveniently no longer engaged, and who also was the one who put her up on this R&R. So Rye Walsh had an ulterior motive, 100%.
Oh, yeah.
And he admits to Frankie that he's been in love with her since meeting her, and he never thought that he would get her because it was his best friend's sister. Like, he's trying to throw a romance trope at her. And she's so into the idea of it. So then she ends up sleeping with him, and they have this whole torrid love affair. And he says, oh, I'm going to re-enlist because you re-enlisted. Like, I can't be away from my woman, and blah, blah, blah. So now you have this man who leaves his engagement to now be with someone else in the war so they can be together. And they both he re-enlists, they can be together in Vietnam. And this sounds like such a cute love story. And it made my heart happy. I think he's finally going to get something. And so she's able to have this whole year with Rye. And when she's done with her tour, she goes back home to California. And Rye's supposed to come home in 27 days. And the two of them are going to be able to create this new life together, create a future. But then Frankie comes home to America. And she realizes that America is up in arms about the Vietnam War. It's a completely different place than when she left it. And she has to reassimilate to being home, and she's plagued from the nightmares from the war and the realities of these hostile war protesters. She immediately alienates friends, and her parents are embarrassed of her and her war record. Like, her parents are so mad that she went to Vietnam. Her dad more or less doesn't talk to her at all when she's over there. It's just her mom, like, writing her letters. And, you know, there's some points where Frankie thinks she deserves to be on the hero's wall. And her dad's like, no. Which,
the hero's wall is for men.
how heartbreaking is that? To serve 2 years in a war and just see death every day, and also save lives, and yet that doesn't make you good enough to be put on the wall because you didn't hold a gun.
And I get his reasoning before she went of, like, we just lost our son, and now you're going to send yourself into harm's way and blah, blah. But then she came back and she tries to talk to them about it, and she has these experiences, and she survived. So she's still not a hero. And he lied to everyone and told everyone that she was studying abroad. Are you kidding
in, like, Florence or something? I was like, so, like, how that's so heartbreaking to know that your family was that embarrassed of the choices that you made, that you became a veteran for your country, but because you aren't a man, it's psychotic. Why would you ever do that? Women are meant to be, homemakers. So why would you ever? Because you got to remember, we're still in the 60s. That was still a prevalent thing. Women don't work, don't do blah, blah, blah. So it had to be.
But she grew up with this reverence for soldiers and veterans, and she was ready to come back to America and, have everyone be thankful for her service. And instead she's getting spit on, and she's getting ridiculed, and people are calling her a baby killer and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then her parents are treating her like this. And all of a sudden she's like, so I guess I should be ashamed. I guess I should be embarrassed. And it's got to be so complicated that on top of coming back from war, she has all of these other emotions.
It's a lot to deal with, and to come home to parents that are just so hostile towards you and not welcoming you in with warm arms like you had hoped and dreamed of, because now you're finally home. You're safe. You should feel loved in your home, and instead she's not at all. And then she comes to find out that Rye has been killed in action. So Kristin Hannah not only kills off Jamie, she kills off Rye Walsh. I am so upset over this. This broke my heart. And I was like, she's not going to do it again. She would never. She wouldn't do that. She does. Spoiler alert.
I texted you
Uh-huh.
and said, does anyone live through this book?
Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
Because I was pissed.
Yeah.
And then I started getting real scared about Barb and Ethel. I was like, oh my God, I won't survive it. I won't.
No. And she's definitely she's starting to get really heavy into substance abuse at this point. And one thing to know about Frankie is I feel like she was very much a straight edge prior to going into the war. You know, when she's there, she like kind of has her first drink. She starts smoking cigarettes. Like you become who you have to become in those situations. And she fully envelops that. So now that she comes home, she's obviously a completely different person. But now she's going through it mentally, physically, emotionally, and has a hospital job that she gets fired from because she just kind of takes over in a situation when you're not supposed to because of what she's used to in the war. Like someone was like a gunshot wound victim, and she just immediately takes over and like trachs him. And you're not supposed to do that as a nurse in America. You have to let like a doctor do it. So she immediately gets fired for that.
And they don't respect her service at all,
No.
her experience, which I understand because the way that they would handle things during the war is obviously much different because they were just doing the best that they could. And it was about keeping as many men in one piece as they could. Yeah. So it probably wasn't necessarily done the by the book way. So I get it, but it's like she's so frustrated that she has to start from the bottom. Yeah. And she's like, okay, not a single person respects what I did in the army, including these people trying to employ me.
Yeah, she's like, I'm a surgical nurse. She's like, I can do this. Like, you know, put me in, coach. I got it. And they were just like, no, you have to kind of, like you said, bottom of the barrel, work your way up. And that's hard for her to handle. And she has a mental breakdown. And she goes to the VA for help with her mental health. And she's turned away because women weren't in the Vietnam War. You know, she wasn't in combat. So therefore, she was not in the Vietnam War. Women weren't in the war.
This was baffling.
When this happened, I wanted to throw the book across the room. And I was like, no, this can't be real. Really? It's
like, just because she didn't have to kill anyone, but yet the amount of men who died in her arms, the amount of women and children and civilians who died in her arms, that means nothing. Nope. Because the only respect was for men who were in combat, in the middle of it. It's just so underappreciated and undervalued, and it pissed me off because how many veterans have such a hard time going to ask for help.
Yeah.
And she was going to ask for help. And they said, we're not helping you.
And she was
so it's like, what else is she supposed to do?
She was so optimistic too, walking into this VA, and she's like, this place is going to help me. It's going to help turn me around. And instead the door's shut in her face. Like, no, we can't do anything for you. And it's in this desperation that she calls Barb and Ethel. And then the friendship bond between these three women was probably one of the most beautiful things in this book because they were so there for each other in every single aspect. So Barb and Frankie move onto the farm in Virginia into a bunkhouse, and they're like DIY girls. They're like that woman that's like, women can do it too, and she has like the bandana and she's holding like a wrench, you know what I mean? Like they're like the epitome of that image that you think of when you see that. And they put in like a bathroom, like they just do all this stuff. And Frankie's able to breathe. She's able to try to find herself. And so that's kind of where part one ends. So we're now in the situation where Frankie's trying to start over and pass the war.
Yes. And I want to say real quick about this friendship. I totally
Yeah.
agree. It was one of my favorite parts. And the way that they had this unbreakable bond, because these are people that never would have interacted with each other, never
Mm-mm.
would have met, never would have talked in the US. And they're literally trusting each other with their lives. And not only that, they're trusting each other to take their mind off of things. Like, these are your crutch when things are horrible, and also the only person who takes your mind off of it. So it's like, we could never understand that bond of these, people who fight side by side.
Yeah.
And especially because Frankie had never even been around a Black woman before.
Nope.
And then all of a sudden, one of her best friends is Black.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, her parents don't say it, but
I know.
I'm sure, they weren't exactly progressive. So,
No. And one of the things that I also loved about this friendship was it shows the true meaning of friendship and dropping anything to be there for your friend when they need you. Because I'm going to be honest with you, there were parts in this book, and I'm pretty sure that this was the point of it. Frankie pissed me off so bad so many times because I'm like, girl, just get your fucking life together. I'm like, you can do this. Like, you're so much stronger than you're giving yourself credit for. And every time she falls apart, these two are there to pick her back up without fail, without complaint. And they're always the same thing. Like, you got to toughen the fuck up, girl. Like, we can do this. You know what I mean? And that's just,
and they drive across the country.
Exactly.
They fly across the country. They make long distance calls, which cost a fortune. Like, they are making sure that she is holding on by a thread.
Yeah. It's crazy.
And she's not reciprocating that.
No.
In the same way.
I know. And I think that was another thing that I disliked about her character, was that it felt like she didn't understand how to be there for someone. And she was used to just people being there for her, to pick her up when things fall apart.
Yeah. So. And I think they do kind of explain it later, just the fact that she felt so isolated because she thought that because Barb and Ethel were always picking her up and moving on with their lives, that they were just completely okay, because no one talked about how they still had nightmares and they still thought about the war every single day. She thought that it was only her, and she kept asking herself, why can't I get over this? Why am I not okay and everyone else is?
Yep.
So I think that's why she wasn't able to help anyone else, because she wasn't able to kind of bury those feelings the way Barb and Ethel were. And I'm not saying what they were doing was right, but
they were able to take those pieces and hold them in them and not let them affect their day-to-day life, whereas Frankie could not do that. She had to live in that past every single day. She wasn't able to ever get herself to move forward.
Yeah, and I think that Barb and Ethel also had a lot more support.
Yeah.
They either came from communities where a lot of the people were veterans, or came back to, it was Ethel who came back to her high school sweetheart.
Yeah.
Right. And so she had, she was building a life that she had to look forward to. Whereas Frankie's still so caught up in what could have been with Rye.
Yeah.
And how it should be with her parents, that she can't look forward.
Yeah, it's so true. Really, everything you just said. I think that's a great way to be. She didn't have that support system. Barb and Ethel were her support system.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
So in part 2, we're in Virginia. It's April 1971. So it's been like 2 years. Frankie's now 25. She's doing great. She's working as a surgical nurse. So she's finally living a life that's hers in Virginia. She's still staying with Barb and Ethel in the bunkhouse. They remodeled it into a cute little 2-bedroom cottage. Living. And she's going to DC with Barb, attending anti-war protests. And they're the only women there also. And again, the men in these protests are against them being there. And they're saying, you weren't in the war. Like, women weren't in the war. And it's just the fact that this was like a
And she
reoccurring
is
theme.
screaming, I
Uh-huh.
was there.
Yeah.
And no one believes her and no one cares. And
Uh-huh.
like, what did they think that she was doing over there? Putting band-aids on the men when they got back on the plane to come
I
back
think
home?
so. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And she also struggles with the fact that she doesn't want to be protesting the war because she was in the war and she saw all of the men who are dying and the support that they're not getting because of the protesters and because of everyone who's against the war, who isn't getting the full story. But she finally convinces herself, you know, well, Barb convinces her, we're veterans, we should have a voice. We should
Mm-hmm.
be able to have a say in this. And then she's like, okay, great, you convinced me. And then she gets there and everyone's like, you're not a veteran. What are you doing here?
And you know what blows my mind too is that these men, you know, that they saw nurses putting their friends back together.
Mm-hmm.
And you're really going to say that women weren't in the war? That they weren't a part of the war?
Yeah, that I didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And she did say that at a couple times. You know, the fact that you didn't see someone like me is why you're back here.
Yeah.
And you're lucky because you didn't see a nurse like me.
Exactly. It's wild.
I was mad.
And she ends up learning that her mother had a stroke. So even though her parents kind of have this tumultuous relationship, she still has like this weird close relationship with her mom.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes back home, reconciles with her parents. She goes home to take care of her mom. Her dad kind of has like this very tiny epiphany that, in my opinion, does not last long enough. Like, he doesn't really apologize, and he still doesn't want her to talk about the war. It's just kind of like this weird situation where the dad is almost like he needs Frankie there to take care of the mom, so he's kind of throwing her a bone, but he doesn't really mean it. If that makes sense. So that's kind of like the vibe I got.
Oh yeah, the dad fucking sucks.
Yeah. Frankie ends up getting involved with an organization dedicated to bringing home prisoners of war, and it's doing something for this organization that we meet the third man of the story, his last name looks like avocado, and I kept just calling him Henry Avocado, but it's like Acevedo. But I'm like, Henry Avocado. And he's a psychiatrist and an anti-war protester, and he very much believes that Frankie was in the war. He's very like, you're right, you were there.
Justice for Henry. Henry was Henry.
We love Henry. But Frankie is still so in love with Rye that she can't give herself fully to Henry, but she's going to anyway. So she marries him. They get pregnant.
Pause for a second. Did this piss you off? Not her leading Henry along, that obviously, but the fact that she spent 1 week with Rye in Hawaii and then a year of like seeing each other when they could, and she is just willing to just give up her entire future because he died. And I know that sounds so like insensitive.
She can't move past it, and it's obviously hindering her true happiness because she just can't get over, and she's so young. She's like 25. She's 25, 26. Like, she's not old. She still has so much of her life ahead of her. And they were never
together in the real world.
No.
But she is so 100% positive that if they were, everything would have been amazing. They would have had a little white picket fence and kids and a family and all this stuff. And it's like, oh, so if you were with Rye, then you wouldn't have had PTSD and you wouldn't have had all of these horrible feelings. Like,
exactly.
Girl, we're thinking not fully here.
I know.
Sorry, go on.
No, it's fine, because it is. And then it's like, because Henry loves her so much. And Henry's older, too. I should mention that. And Henry's got like over 10 years on her, but
but he's so supportive.
Yes.
And he loves Barb and Ethel, and he sees how much they have done for Frankie, how essential they are, how just like how they're holding her together. And he's like trying to help. He's like, I want to be part of that support system too. But
Mm-hmm.
Frankie just holds him at arm's length.
Yeah. Finally, the war ends, and the prisoners of war arrive home. And because Frankie was involved with this organization, obviously she's going to go to support all these prisoners of war coming home. And guess who the fuck comes off a plane in America? Good
No,
old Rye Walsh. Lo and
no.
behold, this man be alive. He's not dead. He was a POW. And the amount of stress that happens in this situation, I can't even imagine. She sees Rye got off the plane. Immediately, her heart stops. And she freaks the fuck out. Rye's alive. Holy shit. She goes to call for him. This man walks into the arms of another woman with a child. So remember that engagement?
And the child is holding a sign that says, "Welcome home, Daddy," in case there was any confusion.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So Rye completely lied to her. He was still engaged. I think he was fucking married or whatever. I don't know what happened before he left to go to Vietnam.
Yeah, they said they got married right before he left.
Yeah. So he just completely omits information. But one of the funny things that I like about Kristin Hannah's writing is that Frankie thinks back on conversations she's had with him and she realizes I wasn't asking the right questions because he'll just give me roundabout answers. I asked if he was engaged. He said, no, I'm no longer engaged because he's fucking married. You know? Like all these questions, she's asking, he's able to give these answers.
She's like, he did love me. And then she's remembering that he said, I'm afraid I'll love you till the day I die. And I was like, that's different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this entire situation obviously takes its toll on Frankie. And I was so scared that this was going to happen, but she does end up miscarrying. And Henry wants so badly to fix everything and to still marry Frankie. And Frankie just can't do it. So she ends her engagement with Henry, the sweetest man to ever live.
He's like, we'll keep trying. We'll have another baby. It's fine. And she's like, no.
And she like tells him, she's like, remember that guy? You know, like, turns out he be breathing. So even though he's with child and wife, I must still pine over him. So whatever. This whole situation, Frankie's like this character that you like love to hate because she's literally such an amazing woman, but she doesn't make smart decisions when it comes to men. And that's fine. That's basically 50% of America.
Yes.
Frankie really gets back heavily into substance abuse, but this time now she's taking a lot of pills. And it's affecting her work life. She gets suspended from work. And then during all of this, she begins to secretly see Rye, because Rye saw her when he got off the plane, just like he hoped he would. And he assures her.
Allegedly.
He's like, girl, I'm going to leave my wife and my child for you. Of course I am. We had that wonderful week in Hawaii where I banged your brains out and everything was great. And we were so happy and bliss. So Frankie, of course, believes every word that comes out of this man's mouth. He must be a real smooth talker. And she thinks that, you know, they're going to be together and they're going to live happily ever after. You know?
This was so sad because it's obvious how naive she is and how she's seeing what she wants to see and hearing what she wants to hear. And this is his fault. He is lying.
Oh, yeah.
100% and stringing her along. But it's so obvious that he's doing it.
Yeah.
And she
just
so
can't
sad.
She just can't see it. And then she obviously eventually does realize that he's lying, because then she finds out that his wife gave birth to their second child.
Well, they were apparently meeting with lawyers to talk about divorce. I think those were actually doctor's appointments, not lawyer's appointments.
Yeah. Yep. And obviously, Frankie feels this, and she accidentally overdoses on pills. And I do believe it was an accident. I don't think that she was intentionally trying to overdose, but I think that she just like one more, like it'll be fine. It'll be fine. She ends up crashing the car that she's in and everything. Almost kills a man.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, the fact that it took this long makes me so angry, but I shouldn't be surprised. But her parents finally check her into like a treatment facility. They're like, you need help. You like desperately need to be fixed because you're not okay. And you're doing things that are unlike your character from before you left. And while I know war changes you, you're still kind of, because they got to see her for a little bit with her happiness. Like her parents loved Henry,
Mm-hmm.
and they got to see her friendship with Barb and Ethel. So they know that she's capable of feeling happiness and
Mm-hmm.
getting through life. And so now with everything with Rye, it backtracked her 100% and made it
And
worse.
it's also the first time that we see anything from her father when I don't even fully understand what she was doing, running out into the freezing cold ocean. She wasn't trying to drown herself.
Mm-hmm.
She said that she saw Finley and she was just trying to get to him, but she wakes up in the back of an ambulance and she said it's the only time she's ever seen her father cry.
Yep.
And he was terrified that he was about to lose another child.
The fact that they didn't even do anything, like I said, when she crashed her car and almost killed somebody, they didn't really take any steps to like do anything for her. And her doing what she did into the ocean is the final step. And it's just crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously we didn't grow up in those times, and I can't even imagine the realistic situations of that happened. And the treatment facility that she gets checked into is actually run by the amazing Henry, Mr. Avocado.
I love seeing Henry again.
Henry, the wonderful man that he is, finally makes Frankie realize that she's been struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, which for a while people didn't think was a real thing. So that's fun.
I didn't realize that this just came about after Vietnam. I didn't realize that it was because of that war that people started recognizing this.
I know. And spends these few months in treatment, and it saves her life. 100% saves her life. She doesn't want to leave.
Another book where the message is that therapy fixes things. We have a theme on this podcast. Has anyone noticed?
Right. But it was so cute because she's like, I know I have to leave because there's people out there that are struggling like I am and that need this. And
yeah. And Henry's like, you are ready. You're as ready as you're ever going to be. You're taking the spot of someone else who needs help. And she's just scared.
I know. And I also
to leave.
One of the other things I loved about Henry in this book was that he was still so welcoming to her after everything that happened. And when they meet again, he's in like a serious relationship now with somebody, and you don't get the vibe that he wants to try to be with Frankie again. He's just being a good friend. Like he's literally like, I just want to see you be better because I know you inside and out, and you're a wonderful person and you deserve to not deal with this shit that you're going through. And that just speaks volumes in general.
Oh, absolutely. And even think about that layer of just embarrassment that Frankie had to have felt. Like I used to be engaged to this man. We were going to have a baby. We were going to have a life together.
Yeah.
And he's seeing me at my complete lowest. But then once she gets over that, he really is able to help her.
Yeah.
And make her see that it is possible. And you don't just have to push through and soldier on and never talk about the war. And then she starts journaling and she starts talking about her memories. And she acknowledges that the therapists there don't know exactly what she's talking about because they weren't there, but she still sees how helpful it is to talk about it and not bottle
I was
it
going
up.
to say, they're still willing to listen and walk her through it. And that's more helpful than you think. Just being able to be in a safe space and talk about the things that you went through and not feel judged. And even though the person doesn't understand it, they're still trying to
wanted to
help
talk.
you. And no one
She
would
wanted
listen
to talk
to
to
her.
her parents.
No
She
one would
couldn't.
listen
She
to
wanted
her.
to talk to her friends, but she couldn't. She couldn't talk to anyone. And she felt like she had to hide the fact that she went to war.
Yeah. When she leaves, she's in Montana. So she purchases a dilapidated farmhouse. And because we know that Frankie is a DIY girly, she just completely turns this farm into a full-on ranch / refuge for women. The first thing she does is she takes in this woman named Donna, who's another nurse struggling with PTSD from Vietnam. And they just rebuild this property and they call it the last best place, which is cute. And it serves, as I said, as a refuge for women who've served in Vietnam and were turned away and didn't have a community or support. So now Frankie, this 21, 22-year-old who witnesses the most horrific things imaginable, comes home and is just thrown into this world that she doesn't recognize. Like almost you get the vibe that she wants to go back to Vietnam. Like Vietnam was better than what she's dealing with in America. And she just wants to be heard and she just wants help. And she goes through this trajectory of not getting that. And it makes her worse and worse and worse. And then finally she comes out on top. And now this woman is going to take care of other women so that they don't have to go through with that. And if that doesn't speak fucking volumes of her character growth in this book, I couldn't have pictured a better ending for her, realistically.
I loved it. Because yes, when she was happy in Virginia and she was a nurse and she was doing great and all this stuff, that was great. But this made so much sense for her to help other women and to see how frustrated they were and to see how angry and scared and sad and just all these emotions that she had gone through herself. And then to see how they would evolve and heal the way that she did.
Yeah.
I loved it.
I know. The choice that Hannah made to do this for her, I think it was poetic. It really, really was. The book ends with the unveiling of the Vietnam War Memorial, which I really wish I had done a little research into this, but I didn't realize how much the veterans did not freaking want this memorial. Like, she didn't want to go, like Barb and Ethel and them, like they didn't want to go, but they're like, we have to. And so she goes to this.
They had been ignored for so long and they had been treated like absolute garbage. And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, look, we have this memorial for you. And not for nothing, the memorial was for the people who had died in the war. It wasn't for the survivors. So it's like, look, we did this monument for you.
It's like they weren't recognized.
Sorry about all that.
For what they did, but the men and women that died, they said there was like only like a handful of women that were like actually included like on the on the wall.
And not for nothing, the amount of money that went into that could have gone to the VA and could have gone to helping veterans and all this stuff, but that's besides the point. Okay, sorry, go on.
So she's at the memorial, she finds Finley's name, and I feel like there's this kind of, she can breathe again in a sense, if that makes sense. Like she sees it, it's finalized, at least he's recognized. And she's like, all right, let me find Jamie's name. I could kill Kristin Hannah. She brings this man back to life. He is alive. He survived. He's like, I just remember like hearing you and oh my God. So he survived. This man survived. He was on the brink of, like, he died like multiple times. They kept bringing him back.
Mm-hmm.
And he survived. He's divorced. Love to see it.
I was like, she did not just bring a second love interest back to life.
Uh-huh.
She did not. And Jamie, the one we should have been rooting for all along.
Yep.
We all were misled. We were all lied to
Mhm.
by Rye, that son of a bitch.
Oh, she ripped my heart out with that one. Because I was so team Rye. And then once he pulled the shit that he did, I was like, are you kidding me right now?
Jamie was the one that we were waiting for all along.
And it just ends like that. And I kind of love that because it gives you this interpretation of what you think that their life looks like now. And it's like, so Frankie, as much as her story sucks, realistically, she does get her happy ending. And that is beautiful to me.
I totally agree. I liked how the ending was not fully finished. It showed the promise of the future. So they get this step towards finally being viewed as heroes, finally being recognized. And her dad makes some pitiful comment about like, okay, I get that you know, good job serving in the war. I guess you're kind of a hero. Not good enough, but it's a start. And there's this unknown of what could happen with Jamie. So normally I hate that the ending of a book is left like that, but it was just this message of hope that the entire story needed, because there's no fucking hope in this whole book.
No, because even at the end, she also gets that moment where a soldier comes up to her and was like, you know, nurses saved my life and it saved like my friend's life. So I appreciate what you did. Thank you for serving. And like, that's the first time Frankie ever gets that. She gets like a thank you for what she did in the war.
And years and years later.
You know what I mean? So I'm going to immediately jump into the first discussion question because it has to do with that. Did the women change your perceptions about nurses in Vietnam or the war in Vietnam, like in general? And I told you before, and I even said this to my husband, I'm not a big like history person. I actually like reading like these historical fiction novels. And so I'm kind of learning about America's history, and I didn't realize how bad like Vietnam was and the treatment that women had, and it's just crazy.
I agree. I knew about, obviously not to the extent of like the protests and the way that the vets were treated when they came back, but obviously I knew about a lot of substance abuse and PTSD and all of this stuff that really stemmed from it, but I never even considered the fact that these men were looked down upon and called horrible names and all these things and not getting the help they needed. I didn't even think about the fact that, of course, that means that the women were being treated even worse and not being acknowledged. Like,
I know.
I just didn't even see it like that. And I was kind of ashamed about that. Because
I feel that
we
too.
also don't learn that in school either. And I'm not saying that this is a history book, but but
it still gives you a glimpse into what it was like, because she interviewed
it forces you to think about it.
Yeah, and she interviewed actual nurses that were in Vietnam during that time. And one of the interesting things that she has in the back of her book, you know, where they do like the little acknowledgments, and she said like she's been wanting to write this story for so long, but she just wanted to be able to tell it well and do it right. And I think she did it right in this book, to be honest.
Yeah. And I think it's good that she waited to get that experience under her belt and to make sure it was fully researched, and to make sure, because I'm sure that a lot of people who have more knowledge about this than we do, or who, you know, might have issues with this book, I don't know, but I could see how this is a very tricky thing to write.
Yeah. And it's actually a good segue into the next question, which is, what did you think about Frankie's argument with her father that he glorifies men going off to war, but not women? Why do you think he feels this way? Do you think people still feel this way? Of course, people still feel this way because we live in a, you know, patriarchy.
Misogynistic society, yeah.
But, yeah.
When he said, when she confronted him and said, "Why isn't my picture on the wall?" He
Mm-hmm.
said, "When you get married, you'll go on the wall because the women are heroes for putting up with the men." I almost ripped that page out of my book. I was like, just the misogyny, the
Mm-hmm.
patriarchy. What the fuck is the matter with you?
I know.
And saying it in such a condescending way of like, "Oh, you're heroes for putting up with us. Ha ha ha." I'm sorry, what? There was literally men dying in her arms, and you couldn't acknowledge that she was a hero. She saved people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
If she was a nurse just over in the US, would you be proud of her? Would you care? Or because she's a woman, you can't care about anything that she does?
It was so mind-blowing how against her dad was that she went to the war, and how like disappointed and embarrassed he was by her. And it's, why can't you recognize that your daughter saved hundreds of lives, and
Mm-hmm.
that she was putting her life on the line to save men of her country? Doesn't that earn her a little bit of credit? Like, she's helping send these men home. Does that
Mm-hmm.
really mean nothing? And that's kind of the same thing with people feeling this way, because once they started allowing women to enlist to be actual soldiers, there was so much pushback from it. And then also, I will obviously won't get into it, but of course then there was all like the sexual assault of men and
Mm-hmm.
women on women, in because they thought they had the right to do that. So it's just the way that
And they
men view
allude
the
to this
world.
in this book too. And they
Yeah.
say, make sure that you're careful. And that's why the women
Uh-huh.
are always sticking together. And that's why,
Yeah.
they're saying, yeah, we're all partying at this club and stuff, but you still have to keep your wits about you. You still have to be careful because
Mm-hmm.
you're still a woman and they're still men.
Yep.
And there was this part, I wrote it down. There's this part, Frankie's writing a letter to her parents when she's still in Vietnam. And she says, "What a waste of life and promise it all is. I'm starting to wonder about it myself, but can't they support the warriors and hate the war? Our
Mm-hmm.
men are dying every day in service of their country. Doesn't that matter anymore?" And this was the craziest thing to me, is that yes, you can completely disagree with the war because the government, the news, everyone was lying about what was really going on. But it doesn't negate the fact that men are volunteering, women are volunteering
Mm-hmm.
and going over and dying for what they believe in, because they also weren't getting all of the facts and they also didn't know what was happening. And the fact that he was so embarrassed of her, even if you don't support the war, can't you still acknowledge that she was doing something bigger than herself, that she
Mm-hmm.
was sacrificing her formative years when she should have been, learning to be a housewife, whatever. But instead, she was doing something so much bigger than herself. And
Mm-hmm.
they made her feel ashamed about it. Like, it's just disgusting and horrible.
What parts of Frankie's experiences in Vietnam did you find the most upsetting?
I think those times where she started to realize that she didn't know the full idea of what was going on, when they had that one village that was completely decimated.
That was just what
And
I was going to bring up. That was the hardest
yeah,
thing for me to read. And I even said this, and it's like, because especially I think what made it hard to read is that we're currently seeing that happening now. And to
hmm
read a book that takes place in the 60s, and to know that we're 60 years into the future and this is still fucking happening.
hmm hmm
It was just
and that
very
she,
hard.
at the end of the day, their job was to try and save as many people as they could. And then when it all dies down and she realizes, okay, this was a bombing on women and children, and we're the ones with the bombs. And it's like, how do you reconcile that
Mm-hmm.
with what you thought you were doing for your country?
Yeah. It was a hard pill to swallow
Mm-hmm.
reading that part.
Mm-hmm.
It was too relatable in the
Yeah,
moment when I'm reading it. I was like, oh, this is like, Kristin Hannah didn't know what was
and
going to happen, but she almost
of
predicted it. You know what
course.
I mean? Like, I'm
And
reading something
also,
that's happening.
the fact that they were getting the newspapers and, getting all these headlines about how
Mm-hmm.
they're winning the war and all this
Yeah.
stuff. And it just is such, and we know this from, being into true crime and stuff like that, the fact that the media can control the narrative
Mm-hmm.
completely, and they still do.
They definitely still do. What about her returning as a returning veteran attempting to reassimilate? What about that was upsetting? A lot of it was upsetting, obviously.
Oh God.
But I think
All
for
of
me,
it.
it was the fact that she was fucking turned away so easily.
Mm-hmm.
She needs help. And I remember how proud I was of her in the book when that was her when the first time that she went to the VA. Because
Mm-hmm.
it was like, wow, like she recognizes the trauma that she's going through and that she needs assistance. And that
Mm-hmm.
takes a lot, especially I feel like being a woman in those times, that's a big deal.
And then she goes back again, even after she was turned away, and she goes back and says, okay, if they're not going to help me, I'll just go to this like talk therapy, basically like an AA meeting, but for vets. And they're like, you got to get out of here. They're not going to feel comfortable
women weren't
talking.
in the war. Women weren't in Vietnam. It was like this whole theme was like women weren't there.
And saying that the men wouldn't feel comfortable talking about their experiences if there was a woman in the room.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy. Literally crazy. And that was just...
So that was hard. That was definitely hard.
So it's like you can't even be surprised of how her life turns out because she was crying out for help and no one was listening.
Mm-hmm.
Until, she meets Henry, and Henry's the best, and Henry saves her life. And that's all that matters.
Henry.
I know. Oh. What did you think about Frankie's relationships with Jamie and Rye?
I think I've made it pretty clear that Rye can go fuck himself.
I think it was what was interesting to me, and it was kind of perplexing at times, but finishing the book, I understand it now. Obsession that Jamie had with Frankie right away, and that Frankie was willing to like fall in love with somebody. And I guess in those moments where they are, to have that little modicum of happiness in a terrible place, it felt so fast paced. And then it was kind of the same thing with Rye. Like she just immediately like jumped into something else again. And like one of the questions is like, do you think there was real love there? And I do think with Jamie, yes, because I think that he, like I said before, he was so respectful to her. And he like knew too. He made innuendos. He's like, I could be a bad man right now. Like I could do this. And he's like, but I'm not going to because you don't want to. And Frankie finally gets to the point where she's like, I'm going to tell this man that I love him. And then he dies. So it's just, so then she has Rye. And I think that she's just like, oh, I have someone here. And I don't want to miss out again.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, but Jamie was there for her in the beginning of the war when she was really adjusting. He made her unleash her potential into becoming this amazing nurse, and he was able to ground her and teach her things. And she said even, when there's all these casualties coming in, he would still be explaining everything that he was doing, and the reason that she got so good was because of him. And when, there's bombings and they're just holding each other and saying, I got you, like they were fully there for support for each other. So I feel like that was real love, even if it was just this deep, deep friendship and they happened to want to sleep together.
That's kind of how I feel. And that's why I think that because they started, their relationship was based on more than just a sexual attraction. Whereas Rye and Frankie, it immediately is sexual first. There's really no...
And it was this whole reminds her of her brother, reminds her of home, like we talked about, and her girlhood crush that she now could have. And the whole time, Barb and Ethel have kind of been saying to her, life is short. If you do something over here, you don't have to be this good girl, People lie and they die over here. And not that they were encouraging her to do something bad or do something she didn't want to do. But I think they were
trying to tell her, like, you need to live a little while you're over here because you don't know how long you've got.
Exactly. Exactly.
So it's like
And
you kind
that
of look at it
encouraged
like
it
with like
too.
through a kaleidoscope, because it's just like, you know, it's gonna be kind of gray area-ish, but
Mm-hmm.
it's okay. Like you will have to, as long as you can live with the choice that you're going to make, then.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think this story would sound like from their perspectives, Jamie and Rye?
I mean, before or after they died. I don't know what it would be like from Rye's point of view because he sucks and his
Yeah.
entire point of view is just lust and he would lie just to get Frankie in bed over and over and over again, even when he came back to the States
Mm-hmm.
and would tell her how he just wasn't getting along with his wife and how she didn't understand him. Well, y'all were still banging because you had a baby. Anyway. And then I feel like we talked about Jamie's perspective would be this much deeper
Yeah.
friendship. Like, yes, I have this lust and I have to hold myself back because I'm really attracted to her, but I'm not going to jeopardize the friendship and the support system I have by screwing that up.
And I also think that Jamie saw Frankie as a real person, and I think he was proud of her and how strong she became from the person she was when she first got there. And Rye just saw her as like a means to an end, in a sense. Like he's just like, I always wanted to bang you, so I'm going to do it now. And you are so
That's a
gullible
really good
that you're going
point.
to believe everything that I said. So I feel like for Jamie, it was real love because
Mm-hmm.
he got to see Frankie blossom in this terrible, terrible place.
Mm-hmm.
And he formed a real bond with her. Whereas with Rye and Frankie, there was no bond. It was
Mm-hmm.
just.
That's a really good point. Rye saw her in this perfect place in Hawaii. I would fall in love with anyone in Hawaii.
Right?
And then they held on to this. I mean, who knows how seriously he was taking it, but they held on to this future plan.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Jamie saw her in the moment
Mm-hmm.
and saw her, I completely agree, for who she truly was.
Yeah, and he was
And
even
saw
like.
her growing up before his
And
eyes.
he was man enough to admit, like, I would fuck you, even though I'm married and have
Mm-hmm.
no regrets about it because I want you that much. Whereas Rye has to lie about his whole situation and hide his true self. So it's like the there's so,
They
Jamie's
are not
amazing.
the
Rye
same.
sucks. Yeah. What do you think happens with Jamie after the end of the book?
I think that they are very good friends.
I can see that. I don't think that but I think that they're friends that also bang. But I don't think that they like. I don't see them having a super romantic relationship because I think that Frankie realizes that life ain't for her, and I
Mm-hmm.
think she'd rather save women
Mm-hmm.
and really. But I can see like Jamie like coming to help out on the ranch, and he's like, "You need a light
Yes.
bulb fixed? I got you." You know what I mean?
I could definitely see him coming to visit. I could see them spending time together. But when Frankie loves, she loves in an all-consuming way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that she would realize I need to give all of myself to these
Yep.
women, to this purpose that I've set up for myself. But this is someone that I can talk to, someone
Mm-hmm.
who's known me all along, basically another Barb and Ethel,
Yeah.
but like who I could bang once in a while.
Right. Who was your favorite character in the book other than Frankie? Why and what about them did you find compelling?
I would probably have to say Barb. Barb just fought so hard for
Mm-hmm.
what she believed in. And she was going through the same things that Frankie was going through, but she was channeling all of that into fighting for what she believed in and fighting for these causes. And, you know, she was always there to help Frankie and Ethel whenever they needed her, but she would also give them that tough love and say, you should be here
Mm-hmm.
supporting, you should be here doing this. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
just feel like she was so strong in her beliefs. And I just loved, even from the beginning, the way that not only do they take Frankie under their wing, like you said, and kind of teach her the ropes, but immediately teaching her how to shut things
Mm-hmm.
on and off. And then they would just sit together on the beach and just be
Yeah.
together. And it's like that, those are the best kinds of
I
friendships.
know. I agree. It's like her and Ethel are like tied for me. Like I feel like they're allowed to like be the same person because they just the love that they felt for Frankie And the fact that that love transcends so much and that they could literally drop everything to be there for their friend, like that's a rare thing to find in life. And the fact that Frankie found that in a completely different country and with women she never ever would have met, like you said, ever. And now they've created this bond that's just going to last them for a lifetime. And I feel like coming home from the war could destroy those relationships, and it just made theirs that much stronger.
And even when Frankie gets transferred to that more dangerous hospital,
and Barb like,
says, "When do we leave?"
Yeah, Barb's like, even though like she's leaving in like a few months. She's you know, now she's doubling her chances of getting killed because now she's going to a more dangerous location. But she's like, you know, Frankie's like blown away by this, and she's like, "You really think we'll let you go there by yourself?" Like, hell no. Like, it's just,
she didn't even think twice about it.
It's like this true warrior woman vibe that these three have. They're just,
and they just came off as so fearless, even though you knew they weren't, and you knew that they were just pushing themselves to be fearless. You know what I mean? And just even the way other people talked about them, like they were just such badasses and just the most amazing nurses they'd ever seen. And it just, I love these women.
I know. All right, my final question. Do you think Frankie is a hero, and what makes someone a hero?
100% I think she's a hero.
In so many different ways, too.
And even when she came back, I mean, she hurt a lot of people, and it was hard for her to cope and all of that. But at the end of the day, once she was able to get out of her own way, and once she recognized that she needed to ask for help and get that help, she never stopped saying, "I was there." Yeah. She never stopped saying there were women in the war, even though everyone wanted to argue with her and convince her that it wasn't true. She never stopped saying it. And she never stopped saying to her parents, "Why won't you be proud of me? Why won't you acknowledge what I did?" And I think that that's a big deal too, that she just stayed so steadfast in what she believed.
That's kind of also like what I think that, you know, the question that what makes someone a hero, I think it's someone that also, they want the recognition just slightly. Whereas you have people, you know, people who like, "Oh, I do all these good things for you, so you should, you know, hold me on a high pedestal." Whereas Frankie wasn't like that. It was just more like, "I just want you to recognize that I did something pretty great, and I'm still me, and you shouldn't discredit the life that I chose," because it obviously did make her a hero. She saved so many men. She saved so many villagers, you know, and then she comes home and she saves herself, and she saves other veteran women. And she's not asking for much. She's not asking to be led to believe, like, to be this hero of war. She just wants to be.
She's just asking them not to be ashamed of her. That is the bare fucking minimum that she's asking for. Yep. And they can't even give her that. So it's like, that's a really good point, that she's not asking for someone to glorify her. She's asking for her damn picture to be up on the wall. She's asking for her dad not to lie about where she was. That's pretty bare minimum, I would think.
I would think so too.
God, I fucking hate that guy. Anyway.
Was there anything else that you wanted to discuss before we get into our ratings? It was a long one. I know there was a lot. We covered as much as I think I hit I tried to hit all the important parts. I hope I got them all.
Yeah, I feel like we touched on as much as we could. There was so many like quotes and stuff that I highlighted that just meant so much to me.
But I almost I want everyone to read it so that they can sit with it, because everyone, I think, also is going to feel a specific way when they read some of these things in this book, especially being a woman, you know? So I highly recommend this book. Like, I'm going to make everyone I know read it. I already gave it to my boss. She already read it. I already recommended it to another friend. I was like, that loves history. I'm like, you need to read this book. And she was like, that was the best book I read all year. I'm like, I know.
Yeah. I recommended it to my aunt. So
yeah. All right. So the rating system, it took me a minute to figure out what to do because it's a very obviously sad book. And there wasn't anything funny about the book whatsoever. Whereas I feel like when we do a rating, it's like, oh, we pull something out that was kind of like quirky and fun. There was no quirky funness in this book. So it's just, this book is just going to be rated out of 5 badass women in the Vietnam War.
Hell yeah.
So what did you give it?
I rated this 5 badass women from the Vietnam War. This is my first Kristin Hannah book. I loved the writing. I loved that I'm not usually into history and I don't usually read historical fiction because I think it can obviously get boring very easily. And it still has all of those true historical elements and all those real life struggles. But then she's got that love story in there. Yeah. She's got those strong friendships. She's got all these things which are relatable and real and make it a fiction story. I saw a couple negative reviews about like the repetition which I get with like Rye and Jamie, and then the relapse and the addiction and the anger and the suicide attempts. But to me, that repetition was so necessary because the road to healing is not linear.
I will say this, Kristin Hannah makes her female characters work for it.
Oh, yeah.
She truly, truly does. And that's one of the reasons why I love her. And I also gave this book 5 badass women in the Vietnam War. Of course I did. But just the way that she writes women, like I'm hopeful that you'll read more of her other books and I will lend them to you because it's just, it makes you think about so much that you normally wouldn't think about. And I can appreciate that. And
it also, it makes me think about, okay, so, I'm this feminist and I talk about the patriarchy and I talk about this inequality and it's like, I'm talking about that in the present tense, but we also need to think about it in the past tense, in the recent past. This is not that long ago.
No.
But this is our history. And it almost made me feel bad about not knowing more and not looking into these things more.
That's exactly how I felt. That was
because they don't
honestly
teach this in history class.
No, they don't. And in reading this book, it just made me realize how sheltered I am from my own country's fucking history. You know what I mean? Like, how crazy is that I just don't know this stuff? It's
yeah. So I definitely want to read her other books. It is a lot. It's a lot, and they're heavy.
No, I told you, like, the other books that I read, I cry through the entire book. This book, the way that it was written, it obviously made me sad and like feel for her, but I didn't cry until the very last chapter, which was, I was shook because I was expecting to like cry the entire book. But that's just like, her books are heavy and you definitely can't do them back to back. You have to space those babies out. So if you're ready for like an emotional read, then you pick up one of her books, but they're all great. They really, really are.
And I definitely, people who don't normally read this genre or aren't normally into historical fiction, give this one a try.
I think it's a good one to do.
Yeah. And even without, diving too much or thinking too much about the history, this is an action movie. It just so happens that this, all really happened. But this is an action movie with a love story and friendships and all this stuff. And it's just... there's so much in there. So I think it has something for everyone.
I think you are 100% correct in that.
So thanks again, Heather, for broadening my horizons. You know how I hate when you do this.
I know. I'm just pulling you away from your horror, gory books and making you read fun romances and emotional reads.
Do you notice how almost all of my other non-podcast reads are like horror books? I just need to balance it all out.
Our friendship. Well, that's all we have for you today. If you like what you heard, please make sure to follow, subscribe, and rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you use. If you have any book recommendations or questions for us, you can email us at fullybookedcafpod@gmail.com. Also, be sure to follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Fully Booked Calf Pod to see our upcoming reads. Thanks for checking us out, and remember,
if you need us, we're fully booked.
bye.
Bye.